All right, welcome in. Happy Monday. Alyssa Orange here alongside Mike Irwin. Of course, it means it is another edition of Ask Mike. Mike, you got some good questions today?
Yeah, I think they're pretty good. Pretty representative of what's going on out there.
We got a lot of questions. Usually I have a paper. I have 5.
Well, I've kind of formatted it different, so it looks like there's more there than really is.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started because clearly we got a lot to get to today. Our first question comes from Said76. We love Said76. Going back to the end of the 2016 season with the 2 meltdown losses, there have been talks about the locker room being broken, division among the players, not buying in, etc. Chad Morris constantly talked about changing the culture, but it just seemed to make it worse. What do you think caused this? Why has it continued to do so? And do you honestly think our new staff can get everyone on the same page? The quitting and lack of fight the past few years has been really disappointing.
You know, I think it was Scooter Harris. I'm trying to remember this. You can fill me in if I'm wrong on this. But I think it was Scooter Harris that said after that last game against Missouri, they were asking what went wrong. And he said, I hope the players buy into the new staff. Because he was pretty much assuming, even though nothing had happened at that point, there would be a new staff. And then other players over the next few days began to talk about the fact that from day one, they just didn't like this coaching staff. I think the big problem was the 2 coordinators. They just didn't know what they were doing. One of them was a great coordinator at one time, but he was on the way down and clearly was cashing a paycheck and never got it figured out. That was the defensive coordinator. And I don't think the offensive coordinator and Chad Morris ever figured out a way to teach that offense to Arkansas's quarterbacks. They had a lot of other problems with the quarterback. They went through 7 quarterbacks, different starters in 2 years.
Yeah.
And it was just too complicated. Players aren't stupid. When they see that happening and they see the failures, they just start letting go of the rope. Now, this staff hasn't even coached a practice. They've been very limited. So all we can go on is what's being said out there. But there have been several points that when coaches around the country have talked about Sam Pittman and how ready they think he is to be a head coach, and they judge him by the staff that he's hired. And by all accounts, this is a good staff, especially the 2 coordinators. That is the biggest contrast I see. You've got experienced coordinators that have a track record of doing something really well. Your defensive coordinator probably doesn't have as much total experience and doesn't have as much experience as John Chavis, but he's younger and more aggressive. I just have to believe that these players will buy into this. And what I've said about this season is, I don't know how many games they're going to win, but one thing I think you will see is you won't see that give up that he talks about, the fact that players just, went, let's punt. This isn't working.
Yeah, all right, here we go. Number 2. Bacon in the saddle.
Bacon in the saddle.
Bacon the saddle again.
Bacon the saddle.
There you go.
Right.
Points out. Last week you mentioned that as far as high school sports is concerned, Arkansas is much better at producing high Division I basketball talent than football talent. The recruiting rankings certainly bear that out. Is there anything that the AAA can do to help close the gap? Is there anything that the college football programs in the state can do differently to help increase participation or player development at the high school level in Arkansas? Or is it just truly talent is talent, and it just happens to be a basketball-rich area?
I think the difference is there's no equivalent of AAU basketball with football. You do have summer 7-on-7, but it's a totally different deal. It's not real. 7-on-7 football is not real football. You can sort of make it fun, but there's all kinds of things that don't happen: blocking, tackling, sacking.
There's no offensive line.
Yeah, and you just don't develop in football. Let's face it, a lot of these high-level recruits that Eric Musselman is now going, like the guys he landed from in-state, they are off of AAU teams that honestly are more competitive than high school teams. I mean, AAU basketball for the elite athlete has become a bigger deal than high school basketball. You'd never have that in football. So there's just no equivalent of that. And I don't think there ever will be.
Yeah.
I don't think this has to be a bad thing. You're talking about maybe 6 to 7 Division I guys in the state that could help you in the SEC. Okay, concentrate on getting all of them. You won't get every one of them, but you can come close. So get the ones, do really well with your in-state guys. Then come along, and there's some guys kind of right behind that might develop down the road. These are your preferred walk-ons. Put a heavy emphasis on that in-state of your preferred walk-ons. And then you've got to go and recruit out of state, and you've got to be good at it, especially in places like Texas. And The thing I like about this staff is they've kind of gone Texas. They've hired coaches that have expertise in recruiting in different places. Texas, East Texas, for instance, Central Texas, Louisiana, the Atlanta area, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida. So if you can have that kind of a diverse area out of state and do well in state, I don't think this has to be a problem. But I don't think you're ever going to change the basketball, football thing because of AAU. There can't be an equivalent of AAU football. I just don't see how that happens, how it works.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Red Leg asks, is there any way the University of Arkansas football program would ever lay claim to their share of the 1977 Rothman-Fact National Championship that the Hogs were given? I realize it's not the AP or the UPI title, but Rothman-Fact was still a recognized national selector at that time, and the players on that team certainly deserve it.
Fill
me in.
Back when they had all of these different things going on, and Arkansas won a version in 65, it was the 64 season. They won a version, it was the National Football Writers Foundation, and Arkansas fans still claim that as a national championship. Some people say, no, that's not legitimate. The purists have always said it had to be AP and UPI. Those were your two things. Here's the problem with all of that. It was all voting. It's somebody's opinion. Can you imagine deciding state champions, and I don't care what state we're talking about, state high school champions in the various classifications in football by somebody voting? There would be an outrage over that. But we stupidly sat here all those decades and let that happen in football. So what resulted was anybody that won any kind of a version of that championship, whoever voted on it, went, yeah, we won that. And Alabama claims like 400 national championships because anything that even sniffed of a national championship, they claimed it. So yeah, you can claim it as a fan if you want. But just accept the fact that we live in much better times now because we actually play this thing on a field.
Yeah, you don't win on a piece of paper.
That's right.
All right, speaking of the 77 Razorbacks, Hang Ten Hog asks, can you share your favorite memory of that 1977 team?
This may sound strange, but my favorite memory of that was Media Day at the Orange Bowl. Now, you have to understand what was going on there. Lou Holtz had suspended 3 of the best players on the team. All 3 of those guys were starters, including Ben Cowens, who was the best running back Arkansas had. And so then you're playing Oklahoma, who was a prohibitive favorite in that game. And so that was supposedly the theme of that whole thing. So they had Oklahoma first, I think, and everybody went out and got them, and then they left, and Arkansas's players came out onto the field. And so we're out there walking around, you'd see a guy, I'm going to go interview this guy. And then you'd move over to that guy. And I'm trying to ask serious type questions, how's Ben Cowens going to stack up compared to, or how's Roland Sales going to stack up compared to Ben Cowens? Can he step up to the challenge? Different things like that. Can Steve Little make a difference in this game with field goals? And I'm trying to ask serious questions. And all I'm getting is kind of goofy answers, especially from a guy named Jim Howard, who's a real comedian, and his friend Steve Little. They were just having fun out there, and they were kind of giving nonsensical answers to things. And this was a big lesson for me because I was still early in my career, and I remember telling the guy I was working with, they're not taking this game seriously. They're going to get the crap beat out of them. I mean, not only are they behind the 8 ball here, they're not even taking this game seriously, and they're going to be in trouble. Well, once the game was over, what I realized was they knew. They knew how good they were, and they weren't the least bit worried, and they weren't even concerned on Media Day. They were just having a good time. So it taught me a little bit less of a lesson in how to read players, as opposed to just assuming a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I love it. Great story. Ready Hog 19 wants to know, do you think football games will continue to be played at War Memorial Stadium in the future? Some of the greatest Arkansas football games have been played there, and I think they need to keep playing there. They need to start winning there, I think, is how you start that.
Well, I agree that I would like to see that continue, and I've said that over and over again. I just think it's important to have a presence in Central Arkansas. Will they continue it when the current contract is over? I don't know. Right now they're due to play a game, I think, in 2021 and another one in 2023, and then the contract's up. So what happens? I've been told that the War Memorial Stadium people, wherever they got the money, I don't know, but they fulfilled all the money part that they had to do to keep this contract going. They put a new turf down. They've made improvements to make it up to SEC quality. So they've done their part. So what happens next? What happens in 2023 when it's up? Here's my basic belief. If Arkansas's program is rolling by then and they're drawing big crowds in Fayetteville, I think they'll eliminate the War Memorial game because their attitude will be, we can get more, we're good enough, people will come up here. If the program is still, then they're going to need Little Rock really badly. So that's a really bad reason to stick with the contract. I would like to see them do it just because it's the right thing to do. But here's the issue. They're playing basketball games in North Little Rock. They're playing baseball games in North Little Rock. Well, guess what? Those facilities are good. You can look at a basketball game there, and it does in North Little Rock. It doesn't look bad. Baseball game looks like better than most SEC stadiums. But what a lot of fans say is that when you play a game in War Memorial and it's on TV, it's embarrassing because people around the country see that dinky stadium and it looks old. It's 72 years old, and the only thing they've ever done to it is basically they built a new press box. Well, how does that benefit the fans? They got a few skyboxes up there that, okay, if you sit in one of those, it's nice. But I think that's the real issue, is that the stadium kind of gives you a bad image on TV. And so what would you have to do to improve it? Probably spend about $150 million to do what? Play a game every other year? That's impossible.
Yeah.
So I kind of think it's going away, but I hope it's not.
All right. This one is kind of a heartbreaking question. Reddy Hawk has a follow-up to know why they no longer play LSU after the day after Thanksgiving.
Yeah, that all happened as an inducement to get Texas A&M to come into the league. Now, if you're trying to get Texas A&M to leave the Big 12 and come into the SEC, one of the big stumbling blocks they had was Texas and Texas A&M had this big rivalry. So you're going to give that up, and that's a big deal. So how do you sell that to Aggie fans? How do the Aggies sell that to their fans? Well, they came up with this idea. Texas and A&M were playing on Thanksgiving Day every year, big deal. Okay, how about you just take Arkansas out of the mix on that day after Thanksgiving Day, plug in A&M and LSU. LSU and A&M are closer to each other than other schools, so you just create a new rivalry, and it sort of replaces the Texas A&M rivalry. And all that was great for A&M and LSU. It was awful for Arkansas fans. And here's what the SEC tried to do. They said, well, but we could do the same thing with Missouri. Missouri's sitting up there kind of all by themselves, and they're new in the league, and they don't have a natural rival, and they're closer to Arkansas than anybody else. So let's just get a little silly trophy and call it something and make it, and we'll just get fans to get excited. And you can tell people that it's a rivalry. You don't make a rivalry by announcing a trophy and giving it a name and saying it's a rivalry. And it's a totally different thing with players and coaches than it is with fans. You don't tell fans who their rival is. They decide that. And right now, and I talk to fans all the time about this, and I'm not saying that there aren't a few of them that have bought into this, but most fans look at Missouri and go, yeah, I'd like to beat them, but I'd really rather beat LSU. I'd really rather beat Ole Miss. I'd really rather beat Alabama, Mississippi State. They're just more into the SEC West opponents that they play, and that is not a rivalry now. I don't know if it ever can be. Now, a lot of people blame Jeff Long for this. I don't know if it was his.
I have a question about that, because you talk about having to get rid of that Texas A&M Texas rivalry, but you have teams like Florida and South Carolina who at the day after Thanksgiving play another opponent that's not in the SEC because it's such a rival. They could have kept that, right? Jeff Long said you could have just kept that. We're not taking that game away.
I think what happened on that was that Texas was mad that A&M was leaving, and they were not going to cooperate with them. They were going to say, hey, if you leave, we're not playing you anymore. So they were trying to put pressure on them.
Another reason to not like Texas,
and
I suppose,
I'm not sure you can blame Jeff Long for this, because I'm not so sure that he didn't have he may not have had a choice. If you get the other 13 ADs in the league going, no, we think this is good for the SEC, so Jeff, you got to go along with it. He got what he could out of it.
He got a game in Dallas.
Yeah, he got an extension because the Aggies wanted to eliminate that Jerry World game, and he got it extended to the end of the contract, and then it's going to go away anyway. So the basic bottom line is the SEC went to Arkansas. And I hope one of the things that Hunter Yurachek does moving forward in very subtle ways is he lets the SEC know we're tired of being ignored and pushed around. When our football program gets good again, we're good enough in basketball and baseball, you're not pushing us around anymore.
I like it. All right. Parallax Pig wants to know, what current players and signees do you think the Hogs will lose in the 5 rounds of the MLB draft?
Really hard to project high school guys. I mean, what we're talking about is somebody good enough to be selected in the first 5 rounds of the draft out of high school. What would you do? In a normal situation, most of those guys would go ahead and sign and take the bonus. But the bonus is weird because Major League Baseball is taking a real financial beating on this season so far, and it could affect them for a couple of years. So now if you sign, no matter what your bonus is, it's $100,000 for this year, and then it's kind of prorated over the next 2 years. But it's not just that. What kind of bonus are you going to get? I got to believe these teams will be less likely to really shell out big bucks right now because of the financial issue. So if I'm a high school guy that goes in the 2nd round or the 3rd round, I may say to myself, well, look, this thing, we move forward 3 years. I can go to college for 3 years. I can up my draft stock, go even higher. And when I come out in 3 years, maybe all this stuff, financial stuff, is behind us, and I could make even more money. So the bottom line is, with the financial uncertainty, I think you're going to see some kids go to Arkansas that might have normally signed, contracts based on their draft choice. Now, the 3 guys that were on their team last year and theoretically could come back, I think they're all gone. The one question mark, I think, is Opitz. They aren't sure about him. And then Casey Martin did tell us last week in that Zoom interview that it's nice to know you've got an option to come back and get your junior year back if you want it. And that made some people think, oh, maybe he's thinking about, well, I don't think you're going to see Casey.
No, but it gives him leverage, is what he was talking about.
I don't think Casey Martin's coming back, and I don't think Keston Kerstad's coming back. And Opitz probably isn't, but we'll see.
Yeah. All right. Old Hog wants to know, has the SEC resolved the spring practice issue? Arkansas had no practices, while most of the other schools had at least a few. When the teams return to the field for fall preparation, will the number of practice sessions be assessed proportionately based on how many days of spring practice each school had already?
Well, that's something we're going to start learning about soon, because when this lockdown is set to, or shutout, or whatever you want to call it, athletes can't use on-campus facilities in the SEC. That ends at the end of this month, the last day of this month. So June 1st, they could decide, okay, we're opening things back up. Or they could push it back. Phil Fulmer, the Tennessee AD, has already said he didn't like that date. Maybe it gets pushed back to the middle of June. But when they decide to come back, you're going to have at least 2 weeks, I think, of strength and conditioning to get these guys back in shape. And then what happens after that is anybody's guess. I do believe that the NCAA / the SEC will acknowledge that these teams mostly miss spring football, therefore they will be able to do things they normally weren't able to do in the summer. And so you could have almost a month to sort of make up for the loss of spring football. Whether or not they would get so detailed in that they would say, well, you had 2 practices and this team had none, so you get fewer of this, I don't know how that's going to work.
Yeah. All right, here we go. Arkansas Recognized says, I've heard it mentioned that there may be more baseball exhibition games this fall. Is this a serious thing, and how many more games are we talking about?
Well, I don't know if it's a serious thing. I haven't heard it discussed, except Dave Van Horn mentioned it about 3 weeks ago, maybe even a month ago when all the lockdown first started. He said that he thinks that something has to be done in the fall to make up for the fact that that they lost almost 2/3 of the season, and they would have no summer baseball. These kids normally scatter all over the country and play in summer leagues. So you got to somehow get these guys back playing baseball again, and one way he said to do that was, instead of playing 2 exhibition games, you might play 10 or 12. It's a very good idea. I haven't heard if that's going to happen or not. And then he also mentioned this: when they allow these athletes to come back this summer, is it just going to be football? Is it going to just be the fall people, soccer and sports like that and football, or is it going to be anybody that wants to come back? Because if they let baseball players come back,
softball should be able to do the same thing.
Exactly. Then he said what we could do is even play some exhibition games in August. Now, I like that idea for this reason. I mentioned it yesterday on our Pick Trail show. you could treat that as some sort of a practice for what they were going to try to do with football games. In other words, let's say you got a game with Oklahoma at Baum Stadium in August, sometime in August. You could let 3,000 people come into Baum Stadium and socially distance them all. And then you would have your own people practice on how they make sure you stand in line and distance each other, how you do work the concession stand, all these things that you're going to have to do for football. It would be a test run, and you could see how well it went. So that would be a good idea, but I haven't heard anybody say that's going to happen.
Yeah, I would enjoy it, but I definitely, we're one step at a time. But I think if they do come back in the fall, they should be able to play. I mean, Dave was saying 8 to 10 exhibition games, and I think that's fair for losing a college baseball season.
It was Connor Nolan that said he thinks if they do this, they'll do it permanently. That would also be good.
Yeah, I've always thought so too. I mean, if COVID-19 hadn't even happened and they did play a full season, I think they should expand that fall ball anyways to have more exhibition games.
It'd be fun.
They've seen that be successful. That would be fun. It's always fun when it's Ask Mike, and that's going to do it for another week. If you have a question, head over to hogville.net, go to the Ask Mike forum, and ask your question there. For Mike Irwin, I'm Melissa Orange. We'll see you next week.